everyone, and welcome to another Scots We Hate podcast. And tonight we're going to be talking about Rymour Books, a small independent publisher founded in 2020. And we're not only joined by founder Ian Spring, but also by two of their authors, Kirsti Wishart and former podcast guest Graham Lironi. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Well, Ian, let's start with you. Starting a small publisher in Scotland at the moment is already bucking a trend, I would say. To do it in 2020, well, I mean, you're really throwing some challenges in front of yourself. Can you give some background and take us through the story of Rymour?
Sure. It was mostly, as most things are in life, accidental that we started at this time. And I didn't really know that so many other small publishers were setting up at the same time, to be honest. My background is in university education, and I had some experience of publishing through university presses before I took early retirement. And I wanted just on my own to set up a little enterprise to publish a few books on folk song, because that's one of my academic areas. Right. And I did publish a couple. But then sometime at the beginning of last year, I was talking to Ruby McCann, and she said she'd be interested in helping. Simple as that, by Scottish authors and Scottish themes. And we'll see where it goes. And it has developed in various ways, not all of which we would have foreseen. One of the first things we intended to do was to publish some poetry based on the emerging spoken word scene in the cities mostly. Of course, that was kibosh, because as soon as we decided to do that, the spoken word scene came to an abrupt end and still has not taken off again.
Sure.
But we have published a couple of books of poetry, two by current poets in Glasgow and Edinburgh. We've also published a historic collection, if you like, which I edited along with Professor Fred Freeman from the Royal Scottish Conservatoire, of the poems of Mary Simon, a very good poet who wrote in Scots largely during the First World War, but who has never had a collected edition of her poems published until we did so at the end of last year. So that's one of the areas we've merged on. We've also started doing crime, and we've started doing mountaineering, and not necessarily with deliberate attention, but looking at the people we knew in the books we got, and we've followed those areas to some extent so far. We've managed in the last year to produce 16 new books, and with a couple on the backlist from I published before, we have 20. I think we have 20 on the list.
You know, that is quite astonishing. I mean, it's a small publisher, as you say yourself, and Ruby, as far as I could tell, are kind of behind it. And you design your own covers, and do you outsource to editors, or are you editing yourselves as well?
We don't outsource anything, apart from some friends do unpaid work proofreading for us. That is the only outsourcing we do. I do the website as well and maintain that, designed and maintained the website. So no, we literally do everything. As far as the production of the book goes, I do it all from initial design through to completion myself. Ruby does the marketing and the social networking, and is involved with quite a few people in the literary scene, more than I am. And I actually don't know that many people in the Scottish literary scene, maybe because I've worked in different places and different, and I worked in England and Wales for quite a few years. So that's the way we bodge along, and we manage. It seems to work fine so far.
Well, I was going to say you must be doing something right, because you were given the country finalist in the British Book Awards, Small Press of the Year. That's quite incredible to do that in your first year.
Indeed, we were astonished when I discovered by looking at. I got up in the morning and switched off my computer, and I hadn't actually heard this until I had several emails from printing companies saying, "We see you've been awarded this accolade. Would you like to use us to print your work?" So that's how I found out. And we were delighted, and that has really made us, because since then we've had a lot of attention.
Yeah.
And a lot of people know about us now.
I'm kind of quite surprised you don't have a printing press out the back garden that you're printing your own out.
Not yet.
So, Kirsti, let's move to you. First of all, can you tell us a little bit about your novel, The Knitting Station, which I think is your debut novel, isn't it?
Yes, it is, although it's the third that I've actually written, but yes, it's the first to get published. But it's been described variously as John Buchan on mushrooms, and Ruby the publicist described it as Nancy Drew meets One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, which I think is a pretty fair description of it. I hope that appears on the front of future editions. But yeah, it's sort of a kind of Buchan-esque romp. It's set in the start of the 1960s, and it's about a group of patients with mental health issues that are taken up to this remote island of Tharn that bears a passing resemblance to Fair Isle. It's famed for its knitwear, and they're going to undergo a form of knitting therapy while there. But the main character, Hannah Richard, she's a former Bletchley Park code breaker. She begins to suspect that they might be getting invaded by Russian agents, but of course she can't be sure if this is actually happening or it's a symptom of her madness. So yes, there are various adventures that follow.
I mean, actually, I've got the cover here, and even on the cover of the current version, it says a very Scottish saga of counter-espionage, knitting, and sheep. So
yeah,
already, you know, you're kind of drawn in by that.
That was me.
Yes.
And of course, when I started reading it, and you said Hannah Richard, and then I was like, Richard, Hanny, you've got the Buchan links there. It's interesting, actually, to read a book that is so clearly influenced by a John Buchan, because he's kind of a writer that's gone out of fashion, I would say.
Yeah, and he's a bit of a problematic writer.
Yes.
I did a PhD years and years ago, and usually when you end up writing about a writer, you either end up loving them or having issues with them. And I think this novel is a way of me working through my issues with John Buchan in a way, because he's great in terms of plot and carrying you along. It's the politics of it that might be a bit kind of dubious. And with Hannah, I kind of wanted a counterpoint to a hero like Richard Hannay, who's very confident, very self-assured, knows his territory, is always in charge. And Hannah's kind of the complete opposite of that. A lot of the time she doesn't know what she's doing. She's not very sure of herself. She's not sure of the terrain surrounding her, and yet she still succeeds. She still manages to get through. So yeah, I kind of wanted to write a book that Buchan would enjoy and read, but feel guilty for doing so.
It's interesting you should say that, because I was at an event at Edinburgh Book Festival a few long years ago now, and a kind of stushy broke out about John Buchan, about his kind of politics of the past and everything. And I thought, there's not many writers these days that will cause people to kind of slam their seats down and walk out, which did happen as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, you've been published elsewhere. Your short stories have been published in various collections and journals. How was it for you working with Rymour and bringing out this debut? What was your experience?
It's been interesting, because it's making that transition from being an emerging writer for years and years and years to suddenly emerging. And also because Ian works so quickly, it was a bit of a shock. It's having to kind of adjust to the fact of having a book actually out there, and also in such sort of strange circumstances at the moment. But it's great sort of seeing a life kind of evolve beyond your own head. It's odd, or appearing in things like this. It's kind of adjusting to that, to people actually being interested, because you're so used to kind of working away without getting any kind of direct response. So, but when I did get in touch with Ian and he said he was aware of my work, I think that does send a message out to all writers that you might feel as if you're writing into the void slightly, but all that you put out is perhaps gathering attention, is perhaps getting an audience, and that can open a door to you when it's all about getting the right person at the right time. And I was just very fortunate enough to hit Rymour Books and to get in touch with Ian at just the right time. And yeah, it's fantastic to see the Knitting Station out there.
Yes, if I could add to that, I was familiar with Kirsti's work from the 1 o'clock gun, and also her essay in the Seven Wonders of Scotland, I had abstracted a bit. I'd taken a bit out to use for something I was writing. So I'd stolen a quotation from her before I actually knew her personally. So I knew she was a talented writer, and I was delighted to hear from her.
And I think the point you make, Kirsti, is a good one, is that, you know, writers shouldn't feel shy about sending their work to anywhere that can possibly publish it, because people like myself and like Ian, you know, do read these things, and you know, your name does become, you know, it's not forgotten. You know, certain names kind of stick out over the years doing it.
Yeah.
So Graham, turning to yourself, you've been published by a few different publishers now.
Yeah.
So what was your, well, first of all, tell us about your Fake Flowers, your book, which is out with Rymour.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, what is it? I'll tell you about it. Just I'm going to read the back blurb
Right.
there. No, I was kind of, I had it in my mind after the last time we spoke. It was my previous book, called Oh Marina Girl. And in my head, Oh Marina Girl was, I had it in a black and white movie. It was I had that Coen Brothers movie, The Man Who Wasn't There, or as that kind of vibe. But this book, I wanted to go to the other extreme. I saw it in my head as kind of a Technicolor kaleidoscope summary, and I wanted it to be light. So I had that kind of caper in my mind. And go back to what Kirsti was saying about Buchan. I've never actually read Buchan, but I've seen Hitchcock, 39 Steps, and the thing I always love it. I mean, I love Hitchcock, but the big cinematic finale, when things all come together in a big grand thing, and that very much kind of informed Fake Flowers. I kind of wanted to bring various strands of what I thought was going on in the world. It was kind of written, it came into formation during the Trump kind of fake news era. And I've always found that kind of blurred boundary between fact and fiction of interest for me, just as a subject to, in some kind of tangential way, to kind of feed into that. So it kind of evolved from there, and just that, and the strangeness of reality. So that brings in this kind of surreal element to it. And it seemed to just, as I wrote, I don't plot things out, but the plot kind of evolved, seemed to some kind of natural way.
Yeah, because I have to say, when I read the first, the foreword in it even, I thought, oh yeah, this is a Graham Lironi book. You never what to expect, and you know, all sorts of things happening there. Yeah. But in terms of then working with Ian and Rymour, how was your experience of that, and did it differ to what had gone before?
Yeah, similar to Kirsti, it was like a whirlwind. I've been with other publishers before, and it's been, when the last one was Contraband, Saraband with Sarah Hunt, and it was very immediate. When she read, I was on the sludge pile, and she read the first chapter and phoned me up enthused. And the same kind of thing, I don't know what it was, I emailed Ian, and I'd forgotten to send a sample, so he said, send me, or just send the book, because I've given him the word count, and it's a short book. He just said, send the whole thing. And the next day, he said, I'm going to let Ruby read it. And within like 24 hours, they said, we want to do it. And I don't think I'm exaggerating, but I think within a month, it was edited and pretty much gone through an editing process, and it was there to go. I mean, it has been a whirlwind, which I'm grateful for. It's great to do that, because I think it's really frustrating if you can get a book published and then it seems to be the normal thing. It's another 9 months until it actually hits the bookshops. So.
Yes, most publishers say it takes 9 months to publish a book. We try to fit it into 9 weeks if possible.
Or 9 days.
You know, I don't think it takes 9 months to publish a book, to be perfectly honest. If you
I guess it depends how many books you're doing in a row, but I think you're probably right. But it still seems like it's an incredible difference to go from, you know, the publishing norm in inverted commas to what you're doing. Is this a way you wanted to approach it from the beginning, Ian?
Oh, sorry, I thought you were asking Graham. Not necessarily. Not necessarily, but to some extent, we were different from most publishers in that the coronavirus left us in limbo, and we didn't have to fit into the maybe normal schedule or annual schedule of publishers, with a spring list and an autumn list and so on, which has gone a bit out the window. So my intention, I actually wanted to just establish quite a good list in quite a short period of time. So I just went on with it. It just requires
that can work in
12 hours a day on your screen.
It could work in your favor the last year rather than against it. I hadn't thought about that at all.
Well, yes, there wasn't a lot else to do as well.
So I guess the question is, how do you choose who you're going to publish? Because there are a lot of writers out there who are looking. I get questions every week about, oh, could you help me find someone who might publish my work? So how did you choose not just these two fine writers, but the others that you've worked with?
We didn't get many submissions until we were in the British Book of the Year Awards, and then we've had quite a lot. We look at them all and we get back to everyone within 2 weeks. To be honest, quite a lot of submissions we get are not suitable because they're not within our remit. For example, Scottish books we say, and we get a lot that are not Scottish, etc. But we've had some good submissions, and I just pick things I like, I'm afraid, and Ruby likes too. So we both look at them. Ruby looks at the poetry and fiction more than I do, and I look at the non-fiction, and we see where we'll go. So it's not a very calculating process. It just seems to be the way it goes. A couple of books we've got that followed on from books we've already published.
Right.
We published The Goat Fell Murder, which is a true crime story by Callum Smith about a Victorian murder in Ireland. And just on the back of that, somebody bought the book, T.A. Stewart, who has written a book called Scottish Canal Crimes. And she phoned me up and she sent me a sample, and I said, sounds good, let's go for it. And I said to her, The Goat Fell Murder, as I produced it, is a good model for what I'd like. And she did, she modelled it on that, and it's just out, and I recommend it thoroughly. It was on a spread in the Sunday Herald last week, quite a lot about it. And another, the most successful book we've published so far has been The Black Cohen, right, which is a massive history of climbing in Skye by Callum Smith also. And it has had tremendous reviews all over the place. It's a big book, door-stopping type of book. And on the back of that, strange enough, a lot of mountaineers read it, and it has had plaudits from famous mountaineers like Derek Gray and Jim Perrin and so on. And the back of that, Roger Eubank got in touch with me, having read The Black Cohen, and sent me his book, which is called The Way of the Cohen,
yes,
which is a tremendous novel set in Skye and the Cohen in 1938 on the eve of war. And Roger is now 86, and he's had novels published over the last 40 years. He's a prize-winning novelist and an excellent novelist, but I'm astonished and pleased to say that at the age of 86, I think he's produced his best ever novel. It's a tremendous read, and we're hoping to do very well with that. And we've already had quite a lot of interest in it. So the books follow on, I'm saying, from other books were published. So it's not so much a planned road you follow as something you just go up various paths as things turn up, and other things have turned up. Recently, I was just speaking to him today. I'm doing a book by Phil, what's his name? I just checked that. Phil Vasily, who's already an author known for, he wrote the biography of Walter Tull,
right,
who was the first professional black footballer.
Oh yes,
UK. He played for Rangers, and he's also written a biography of his brother, Edward Tull Warnock, and it's another extraordinary tale. He came from a slave plantation, his family, and he came to this country and became a major practitioner in the NHS. He worked in dental surgery, I believe, and he was also a footballer of professional standard and a golfer of a high standard. And he was instrumental. More importantly, he was instrumental in supporting black rights at the beginning of last century. So that'll be coming out in September, I hope, and I'm looking forward to that too. So just something like that I saw and immediately saw that I thought that that's the sort of thing we would like to do.
It's fascinating to hear, because it's that idea of, I like this speaks to me, we're going to go with this, and I think that's what often other publishers get tied up in, what they should be publishing and maybe what they shouldn't be publishing. and that can cause issues. It's very interesting to hear you say that Ruby's been looking after the literature, the fiction, and you've been looking at the non-fiction, because you're a writer yourself, Ian. And in fact, we've got a collection of your short stories here, The Stone Mirror, which is a fascinating collection. I've just kind of dipped into it, but so these stories, let's talk a little bit about The Stone Mirror, because I think it fits into what Kirsti and Graham are doing as well. I would say they're literary it references other authors, it references other styles, it sets out in the author's note, which is a fascinating piece of reading in its own right. And I was thinking that both Kirsti's book and Graham's book do something similar. There's references to, or at least allusions to, other writers or other artists, in Graham's in particular. Can you see a Rymour book, a Rymour writer emerging? Is there areas of your interest that you think these are the writers I want to publish?
I think that might be true to some extent. I immediately liked Kirsti's book because it was a bit wacky and offbeat, and I immediately liked Graham's book for the same reason, and thought possibly it ties in with my own writing. I mean, The Stone Mirror is a slightly weird book. It's a bit gothic in nature. It's what used to be called metafiction or fictocriticism and so on. So it can be read on two levels. I've tried to make them stories that anyone could read as a simple narrative, but there's also a lot of things that a more literary reader who's familiar with contemporary literature, mostly 20th century literature, might pick up from them. But I'm glad you like that particular collection. I was a bit flummoxed as how to market it because it doesn't fit into any established genre very easily, but it'll find its way, I'm sure.
Well, it goes back to something we spoke about earlier, actually before we started recording, if I remember rightly, is that short stories are a hard sell, apparently, and literary fiction, so people tell me, is a hard sell. But I'm so glad people like you are publishing, because it's absolutely what I want to read. And that goes for Kirsti's writing and Graham's writing. If I can go back to Kirsti and Graham, maybe Kirsti, you first. Were you aware of what Rymour were doing with other writers? And was that something that appealed to you?
I think because I got in quite kind of early. I mean, it was complete sort of that I got in touch with Rymour. It did seem as if they would be interested in perhaps quite offbeat topics, but I'd written a proposal for a book on psychogeography that had actually been rejected by another publisher, and got in touch with Rymour purely on the off chance, thinking, well, this might be something that they're interested in. And much to my shock and horror, the response was instant: yes, we would be interested in this. And again, it just seemed, I've been so used to getting in touch with publishers and waiting 9 months for them to say no, that to have that pretty much instant response was great. So I have to admit, I'm still to get stuck properly into the psychogeography books. I keep on trying to put Ian off by giving him novels in the hope that he'll be distracted from that. I'm still working on that other thing. But I do think, having read some of Ian's short stories, I think there is a similar aesthetic there. So it will be interesting to see the future writers that are produced. I think you can see similar threads and similar strands and interests being developed, I think, within all our work, which is fascinating.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. I kind of read all three, or at least dipped into all three over a short period of time and started making kind of those connections. Graham, what about yourself? Did you see that there were kindred spirits at Rymour?
Well, I hope so, and it certainly seemed to be the case. I hadn't read Ian's book until I'd kind of been signed up and joined, and I was kind of, honestly, reading The Stone Mirror, it was like reading Alistair Gray's short stories for the first time. It was like discovering unlikely stories mostly, or Italo Calvino. I was kind of that blown away by some of them. So I was like, great, I'm home again. But mind you, I felt home in every publisher I've had, and then I'm thrown away. But no, I thought I was really encouraged. I've always tried to keep one eye on when you're trying to find a publisher. And then I don't know, I'd obviously been sleeping for a year or 6 months, but I discovered Rymour and Leamington Books at the same time. I thought, wow, these sound like just the kind of Scottish publishers, independent Scottish publishers that I want to see, whether it's for, or they're publishing books I want to read, whether it's mine or not. So, I mean, yeah, I was delighted when that kind of just maybe idiosyncratic, and you know, I'd sent out fake flowers to literary agents, and you know, I don't think I even got the courtesy of a rejection. It's just, you know, you're just pissing against the wind doing that. Or I find that very soul destroying. So it's been great, and yeah, I think it's great to have, if independent publishers can keep if they can make the budgeting work, they can publish these kind of more adventurous or riskier or more idiosyncratic or literary or whatever kind of books that maybe the mainstream publishers would shy away from.
It's why this conversation is so uplifting for me, is because not only is it a new Scottish publisher, Ian, but you're publishing, well, two writers who I did know in Kirsti and Graham, but your own work as well, which, as Graham says, it's a terrific collection of short stories, which brings to mind all sorts of my favourite short story writers, and which, as I say in your author's note, you kind of doff the cap to that, you know, your influence as well, which is great. So, I mean, you mentioned briefly you're looking at non-fiction as well. Do you want to say a little bit more about that, so that people have an idea?
Yeah. First of all, could I just say that we have very close relationships with other independent publishers in Scotland. So with Peter Burnett of Leamington Books, we're planning a collection of Scottish Gothic literature later this year. And close connections with our other publisher in Perth, Rymour Books, Paul Philippou runs. So we try to make connections wherever we can and do things together and support each other. But in terms of non-fiction, yes, probably I was expecting to get more non-fiction. For example, after the success of the climbing books we had published, I posted everywhere on Facebook where there was a climbing group or a climbing interest type group saying, I'd like more books about climbing in Scotland or the Scottish mountains. You know, anything except a guidebook, but
yeah,
you know, travelogues, and I didn't get any. I didn't get any submissions at all from that. So that's still something I'd like to do.
yeah.
Just as I'd like to do more psychogeography, as Kirsti mentioned. But non-fiction, as I say, the Scottish Canal Crimes, I'm very pleased with that. I think that's a nice book that's just out. The next non-fiction book that's coming out is a great piece of academic work, but might be a little harder to sell. It is a biography of the Honourable Rory Erskine of Mar, who nobody has ever heard of, but was quite an important figure in the early years of last century in the national movement, and especially in language. He was a proponent of Gaelic and Scottish nationalism. And that's a very well-written book by Jerry Cairns. We're also going to publish, Jim Ferguson's written a book of poetry for us, but we're also going to publish his book about Robert Tannahill.
Yes.
The Paisley poet. An purely academic book. Again, there's not a great market for these books, but they deserve to be out there somehow. But if you're asking about non-fiction, yes, I'd like more submissions of non-fiction titles that we consider of a Scottish interest.
I'm quite surprised about the people not submitting things about the natural world and hill walking and stuff, because it seems to me quite a kind of burgeoning area. You know, I've spoken to the writer and walker John D. Byrne a couple of times, who's done just that. And it does seem to like an area that people are increasingly interested in, perhaps even more so as we're now coming out of lockdown and people are wanting to get to the hills and understand a bit more about it. You know, you need to find the next Nancy.
Well, maybe somebody will listen to this and come up with something, but I'd appreciate any prospective titles in that area. And
first Kirsti and then Graham, what are you planning next? What's next for both of you?
Well, hopefully, because he's done the cover for it already, Ian will be producing my next novel, The Projectionist, hopefully. So we'll see how that goes. Possibly there might be another novel about Scottish heroes, but at the moment I'm working on a novel that's about sort of the Green Man visiting Edinburgh and the effect that he has on the wildlife and what have you. So yeah, and of course, and the psychogeography book, I'm working on that as well. So that's me.
I can't think of any of the publishers who would have the cover before they had the novel. That really is an interesting. And,
yeah.
Well, I don't think it is actually. I often do that because I think seeing something, I like to envisage something, and you know, what you used to say, whizzigig, what you see is what you get. And actually, in fact, when I write, I often write directly onto a InDesign page.
That's fascinating.
So I can see it as it moves. Finally, so when I do the cover, I think it gives me an idea, you know, a concept you can visualize, start to visualize the whole book. And of course, it's useful for putting on your website as a pre-publication.
Of course. And Graham, yourself, what are you planned next?
I'm revisiting a book that I wrote in between Fake Flowers and O Marina Girls, called The Paradise of Free Souls. Yeah. And at the time, I thought it was finished and I thought it was great. And then I reread it about a month ago and thought, this needs a complete rewrite. So that's what I'm in the midst of doing. I think I think it can still work. Well, I think it can. So I'm going to give it another go. I find that it's always, once I find my books need edited and then re-edited and then edited again. So I'm hoping to get that into a format that I can maybe present to Ian maybe about 6 months from now, something like that.
That's interesting. Do you ever feel that you completely leave your books behind? Because I know some writers don't.
Not until they're in print, and then even then I try not to read them. But no, actually, I mean. No, I think we had this conversation last time. I think as a writer, we're going to try to see what Kirsti says. I think it's finished. It's a masterpiece before I send it to the publisher. And then this worked very quickly. When Ruby read Fake Flowers, and she came back within 24 hours and absolutely nailed half a dozen kind of plot points that were needed addressed, which I hadn't seen, and having, you know, given her the third, fourth, fifth draft. And I was like, it's then so obvious. You need that outside. And I guess I'm guilty of, I do like let friends and family read it, but maybe you need that real outside perspective, I think, from people you don't have a personal relationship with. And I enjoy that, almost that collaborative process when it gets to that stage, when you're really refining it.
And Ian, to go back to you then, what's next for Rymour, apart from what you've mentioned already?
Well, we've got quite a few things in the pipeline. One thing I should mention is we've got a great book by Nick Aitken called Drystone, which is about making dry stain dikes. But it's an enormous book. It's a big coffee table book, beautifully illustrated. Fantastic. And that'll be coming out. The Royal Scottish Geographical Society are supporting us in that, and we're going to put on a lecture in Perth about it. But Nick lives in the States, and it's been difficult to find a time away for him to come here yet. So that's on the pipeline. We've got 3 quite big novels, I think, that are the thing. I've got a couple of poetry books, but 3 big novels. There's A Projectionist by Kirsti, which I have high hopes for. I think it'll do as well, if not better, as the Knitting Station. I really like it, which we'll get out, we'll get prepared over the summer. Stuart Campbell has written a book about the Buckenites, which is a historical novel about Elspeth Buchan, who had a weird religious sect in Scotland in the late 18th century, called the Women Clothed with the Sun. And I'm very hopeful for that. And my good colleague, Simpson Greers, has penned a crime novel called The Counterfeit Detective, which is a big novel of 500 or 600 pages. And it's a sort of literary international Gothic thriller featuring time travel and Victorian pornography. So you can't imagine.
That sounds fascinating. Well, listen, thank you all for joining me today. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I can't wait to see what Rymour Books do next.
Thanks, Alistair. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair.
And we'll be back soon with someone completely different. Cheers.